1 Kings chapter 18. I've been teaching you all this series, and this is going to be the third and the last part of this little series about the name of God. And remember, the very beginning, I told you all that it sounds kind of sacrilege, kind of disrespectful, but God is not God's name. It's a title that we call God. Just like you call your parents mom or dad. That's not their names, that's their title. And calling God God is not a bad thing, right? It's fine, it's completely okay. But I think it's important for us to know, as people who worship the one true God, what his personal name is, because it carries with it a lot of significant meaning and power, I believe. And we talked, the first part was the four-letter name of God, Yod He Vav He. It means he was and he is and he will be. And remember, we said Moses learned of this name. He was really the first person to learn this name at an event called the Burning Bush. And he said, don't worry, go into Egypt and tell your brothers and your sisters that the God who was, the God who is, and the God who will be sent you. The Ayeh, Asher, Ayeh. And that's his personal name, the four letters. And we learned in the very first part that can be found in the Hebrew Bible almost 7,000 times his personal name is mentioned. Some people pronounce it Yahweh, some people pronounce it Yehovah or Jehovah. We really don't know for sure how to pronounce his name, but we know what it means. He was, he is, and he will be. He's everlasting. The next part we learned was El Shaddai. El Shaddai. If you guys remember, that's when I embarrassed myself by sipping on the baby bottle. Remember that? And I had some milk in there. And it's not embarrassing. We learned that El Shaddai is another name of God. And El Shaddai is two Hebrew words, which means God is my all-sufficient, or God is my provider. And I likened it to when you're nursing from your mother as a baby, and she's breastfeeding you, and that's all you need. And you can live completely off of your mother. It's an amazing thing that God created women this way. That they can sustain another human being with their body for up to a year and a half, 2 years. It's just incredible, and that's all that baby needs. Now, eventually that baby will grow older and want more than just milk. And I also likened El Shaddai to a field. Remember the field that had all the crops and the plants and all kinds of vegetables that you could eat from? You could provide for yourself in the field. And that is the same word that we use there for Shaddai. Shaddai is like a mother's breast, but it's also like a massive garden or a field where there's lots of food growing. He's our provider. He's El Shaddai. The last name I'm going to teach you, and guys, this isn't the last name of God. If you want to really dig into the word and study the names of God, there's endless names for our Creator. But these are just some of the most frequently used ones that we see in the text. Have you ever heard of Jehovah Rapha? Jehovah Rapha. Okay, a couple of you have. Good. We're going to talk today about God as our healer. How many of you believe that God heals? He still heals. Good, yeah. I believe he heals as well. And we look at the Gospels and the ministry of Jesus, and he heals a lot of people, right? He goes around and he's traveling around on foot in the countryside, and he's doing weird things. He's like scooping up dirt and spitting in it and then putting it in people's eyes. And people are like, well, okay, I can see, that's fine, okay, whatever. And then he's also touching lepers, people who have highly contagious skin infections. And suddenly they're cleansed of that. It's incredible. Those are all physical healings. But then there's this one interesting story where he goes to someone who's afflicted by a disease. And they cry out to him, heal me, heal me. And he looks at him, he says, your sins have been forgiven. And I don't know that's what that person wanted at that time. He did go on to physically heal them, but then he said, is it easier for me to heal them physically, or is it easier for me to forgive their sins? What he's saying is that really he needed to look inward at his sinful lifestyle. That's where I really want to do the healing. That's where I really want to heal this person. Sometimes we can get so fixated on our physical healing or someone's physical healing, but when we forget that there's an inward healing that has to take place as well. So God is a healer. He still heals. But what does it look like? Let's go to the next one. This is Psalm 147, verse 3. I don't want you to turn here. I want you to stay on 1 Kings 18. But the Lord builds up Jerusalem. He gathers the outcasts of Israel, and he heals the brokenhearted, and he binds up their wounds. Scripture tells us that God heals, and he binds up our wounds, right? The word for heals here in the blue, and it's underlined. You see that word, heals? Let's go to the next slide. It's this word right here in the Hebrew, Rapha. Everybody say Rapha. Rapha. Rapha, yeah. And you can write this out. I like to make myself look smart. I like to write it out. And if you're taking notes or anything like that, it's 3 Hebrew letters, Resh, a Pei, and an Aleph. And it's in its most literal sense, it means to revert back to its intended purpose. Intended purpose. So, I had this camper one time I bought. My wife found it on Craigslist, and my wife was looking on Pinterest and everything, and she saw this camper. It was up in Dade City, about an hour north of my house. It was $40 for this camper trailer. You know, like you sleep in, you go take camping on vacation and stuff. $40. And I was like, okay, yeah, we'll go look at it or whatever. And we get up there, and this thing's a piece of junk. And the tires were about half buried in dirt. And the guy comes out, and this guy, for some reason, he was like a cat breeder. I've never met a cat breeder before. But he had like special cats. And he had been like raising some of the cats in this camper. If that kind of gives you an idea what it smelled like inside this camper. But they were like special cats. They were like little like dwarf cats. It was bizarre. So anyways, we buy the camper. And here's what the guy says. Literally, he says, if you can tow it out of my yard, you can have it. So I hook it up to the 4Runner, my 4Runner that you see out in the parking lot, and I get it out of his backyard. I make sure there's no cats still in the camper, first of all. And I get it to my house, and this thing just barely makes it down like an hour to my house in Lakeland. And I park it in my driveway, and all the neighbors are just like looking out their windows like, what in the world are they doing? $40, got myself a camper. But it had a problem. It was destroyed inside. It was just in utter chaos. I would walk in that camper, and like the fumes from like all the cat urine and just the mold and everything would just hit me, and I would just start dry heaving, It could not be used for its intended purpose. I had to do some serious work. And guys, it took me about 4 to 5 months of just going in there with a respirator and a crowbar and just ripping stuff out. And then I would come home in the evenings from work and just go in there and just start just gutting that camper out. It was a mess. And I would fill trash can after trash can after trash can. I got it down to where it was just the metal shell of this camper. And I put maybe, if I had to guess, probably 300 hours of work into this camper to get it to where we could actually sleep in that camper and take it on camping trips. And it actually ended up being a great camper. And I sold it a couple years later for way more than I paid for it. Somebody just fell in love with it. They were like, I want to buy. I didn't even have it listed on Craigslist or anything like that for sale. People just offer me money for it. And I was like, I can't refuse that. So I restored my camper to its intended purpose, and we used it as a family. But in a sense, I Rapha'd it. Do you get the picture there? That's Rapha. That's healing. And that's the name of God when we say he is our healer. He is a Rapha. He heals. Have you ever heard the name? Well, let's go one more slide. Who is, see if you can identify this guy. Somebody raise their hand. Which Ninja Turtle is that? Yeah, JT? You're wrong. I know my Ninja Turtles. Who said it? Somebody said it back there. Yeah, Leilani. Say it again. Raphael, yeah, Raphael. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But let me say that name slowly. Let me say that name slowly. Raphael. Raphael. Do you hear something there? You hear the word Rapha, right? Yeah, what his name means, Raphael, means my God heals. So it's really interesting. Obviously, he's named after a famous artist, but Raphael means God is my healer. God is my healer. Do you see Raphael? Rapha? So let's go to 1 Kings 18. If you go one more slide. This is an interesting story. And we're at a point in Israel's history here where Israel has fallen. It's one of their lowest points in history. The nation of Israel has fallen spiritually to idolatry. Even its own king at this point, King Ahab, is married to Jezebel. And they themselves are involved in pagan, idolatrous worship. Even the king and the queen of Israel. So sin has just taken this, it's just like cancer in the nation of Israel at this point. They are at a spiritually, ultimately low point in their lives. And then there's this man, Elijah. And I don't know about Elijah, is the most fascinating. I named my son, one of my sons, after this man. He's one of the most fascinating characters in the Bible. He comes in the scene here in 1 Kings 18. And against all odds, and Jezebel and Ahab, they wanted his head on a platter. Don't get me wrong. But he stands up boldly, and this happens on a mountain in northern Israel, in the region of Samaria, on Mount Carmel. And they're there, and that was one of the high points that were set up by the northern house of Israel. And it's there that they blended themselves with nature worship, and the worship of things like lightning, the worship of a god to rain, worship of a god of thunder and famine and drought. They had all these different idols set up there on the top of this mountain. And archaeologists have gone in and excavated a lot of this stuff. And they're up there, and Israel is at a point where it hasn't had rain for many years. And people are dying, animals are dying, and they're at a point of desperation. And these prophets go up there. There's 450 of them, and they worship these various gods. And their mindset is, we have to appease these gods in order for it to rain here in Israel. And they're up there, and they're doing this trance. Well, let's read the story. 1 Kings 18. Let's start at verse 16. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. And when he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, the troubler of Israel?" I like that. Elijah is the troubler of Israel. "I have not made trouble for Israel," Elijah replied, "but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commandments and have followed the Baals, the false gods. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel." It's going to be a showdown. "And bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent word through all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. And Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is our God, follow him. But if Baal is God, you follow him." But the people said nothing. Then Elijah said to them, "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it yet. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God." You got to remember, they're worshiping the gods of lightning and fire and rain. Then all the people said, "What say you? What you say is good." Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire." So they took the bull, and they prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning until noon. "Baal, answer us," they shouted. But there was no response, and no one answered. And they danced around the altar they had made. And at noon Elijah began to taunt them. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling, and maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened." So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until the blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time of the evening sacrifice. But there's still no response, and no one answered, and no one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come here to me." And they came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. And Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes of Israel, descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Your name shall be Israel." And with these 12 stones, he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it, large enough to hold a lot of water. And he arranged the wood and cut the bull into pieces and laid it on the wood. You guys know the rest of the story. What happened? Fire came down and consumed the offering, right? So in the face of all those false gods, in the face of all those false Baals, Elijah calls down the presence and the glory of God. But what I want to call your attention to, I want you to zoom in for me. If you could go to the next slide. I want you to zoom on verse 30. On verse 30, it says, "Then Elijah said to all the people, 'Come here to me.' And they came to him. And he repaired the altar." The Hebrew word there behind repaired is rapha. He raphaed the altar. What does rapha mean? Healed. How could Elijah heal an altar? An altar is not a living thing. But that gives us an idea of what healing might be like sometimes. It might be stone by stone by stone. Healing sometimes, like, as opposed to what we see in the life of Jesus and the ministry of Jesus, where it's instantaneous, healing sometimes can be a lot of work on our part. It can be like this. So I'm looking around. Anybody see any stones? Right there's one. It's like, man, that time that my dad walked out on us, that's a heavy stone. I don't know if I can put this one down. It's so heavy. I don't know. I don't know if I can hold it either. I don't know what I did to my dad, you know. I don't know why he's not in my life. It makes me feel worthless. But I just want to carry the stone around with me. Yeah, it's heavy and it hurts. My arms are already shaking. But I can't put it down. I can't let God do something with that. Or when my parents divorced and it just felt like it was my fault. And I don't know, it just kind of shook my world. But I can't put that down. But sometimes it takes work, you know? And when we do, when we finally lay it in its place, it's like, wow, I feel lighter now. I feel lighter. But as you go through life, you accumulate more. You scatter your stones more. The enemy comes in and he scatters the altar that was you. And all the experiences that you accumulate in your life, throughout the years of your life, it seems like you can accumulate more and more hurt in your life. And those heavy stones that you want to lug around. Like, I don't know, that time that I prayed for my dad, and God decided not to physically heal him. That's a heavy stone. That time my grandmother died, despite all the prayers and everything that we lifted up. I don't want to put that stone down. It takes work on our part. But when we show God our wounds and we open up and remove the bandage that we apply and quit pretending like there is no wounds there, he can do amazing things with that. You have to show the physician your wounds in order for him to heal them. So there's another stone. It takes work for healing to happen. I'm trying to remember where I put all these stones. See, some are more obvious than others, right? Some you got to think about because you've hidden so well. You've hidden so well that you can't even see them yourself. And you have to ask God to reveal them to you. You know, this is the time that that kid at school, he would not stop calling me those names or would not stop calling me this or that. You know, this is that. They constantly belittled me all through middle school. And that hurt really bad. And I need a physician to heal it. So I'm just going to put it down and see what God does. Oh, this takes work. I'm an old man. I'm out of shape. But see, the more you do this, and the more frequently you do this, the easier it is, right? Less work you have to do. So Elijah is healing the altar. And why is he healing the altar? Because he believes that once he gets all 12 stones, you see, he knows that through healing comes glory, just like that. Through healing, God's glory can manifest itself to everyone around him. And through your healing and the binding up of your wounds, God's name will be sanctified in the world, and he will be glorified by those around you. So, this is, my dad, I just feel like I wish he didn't speak that harshly to me, It just made me feel like I was just nothing, inside. He just had a temper on him, and sometimes he would just do things that, in his anger, made me, all the nice things he ever did for me just felt like I was nothing to him. But I'm going to give it to God, I'm going to rebuild the altar. And in a way, you guys are that altar that Elijah rebuilt on Mount Carmel. God's glory wants to manifest itself in you so that it can emanate into the world. But that cannot happen unless you allow him to heal and to repair that altar within you. The world wants to scatter those stones. The world wants to break down the altar, but he wants to rebuild it within you. But you have to allow him to do that. What does that look like? Okay, yeah, I'm ready for God to heal me. I'm ready for him to regather the stones, but I have no idea what that even looks like. What's step one? Find a quiet place. Find a secret place and get on your face before him and pour out your heart to him. Like I said, the physician, the Rapha, the healer, he cannot heal you unless you show him your wounds. Getting on your face and crying out before him. He wants to know that you've been hurt. He wants to know where it hurts. He's our Father. Whenever my sons hurt themselves, I say, tell me where it hurts. I want to help you. Show me where it hurts. That's step one, is getting on your face, finding a place alone and crying out to him. Heal me, Father. I've been dealt an injustice. I have been hurt and I have wounds. My stones are scattered. My altar is broken. The next step is just trusting the healer. Sometimes it's painful. When you go to the doctor and they squirt that stuff in there and it stings, right? It's part of the process. You have to open up and you have to allow the healer to do his job. And you can't hold back. But guys, I promise you, through the tedious steps and through constantly regathering the stones of the altar and repairing the altar, the healer will allow his glory to come down. And it was that day that the famine was broken and Israel received rain. It was that day that Israel's history changed forever. Because one man stood up and he regathered the stones and he healed the altar. Let's pray.